everybody.
You do.
No. All right, bring it together. All right. Welcome to the Thursday, May 1st, 2025 meeting of the City of Harbor Springs, Michigan Planning Commission, 5:30 p.m. local time. And we'll start with a roll call, please.
Bill Mulner.
Here.
Barry Lustgarten is absent. Michael Behrman.
Here.
Bob Buckner.
Here.
Vanessa Warren.
Here.
Kenny Stewart. Here. Tony Johnson.
Here.
Chip Everest.
Here.
Mark Boudet.
Here.
Annika Alonzi. And John Icoangeli is not here in person, but he is on Zoom, so we will have his expertise when we get to that section. We can call him.
Thank you very much. Next thing on the agenda is approval of minutes, and we don't have any minutes because it's a special meeting. So we can go to public comment and correspondence. Any thing that you would like to tell the planning commission? Hints. Mark.
I'm trying to make it brief, guys. Mark Rondell, 181 Zoll. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd just like to quickly comment on one of the topics discussed at the last commission meeting while it's still fresh in everybody's mind. As I understood the discussion, the applicant wished to build a garage on his property with an unfinished space on the second story. The discussion focused on the fact that the space might be finished off in the future and become a living space. This possibility moved the project from a by right status and required the planning commission review for a change use variance. During the discussion, it was acknowledged by the commission that technically the proposal met the criteria for approval in the zone, but the objections by neighbors would contribute to influencing the commission to deny the variance. Jeff tells me that some of the criteria were not actually met, but this change in reflection, however, gets to the heart of the difficulty of making subjective decisions to satisfy multiple parties when our zoning code is both arbitrary and ambiguous. The lack of specific standards makes it very difficult to maintain consistency in our judgments and fairness in the application of the regulations. It has long been held that property ownership consists of a bundle of rights conferred upon the owner by the ownership status. Zoning codes inherently remove some of those rights. This is justified by the need to protect the health, safety, and welfare of all residents of the community. All of these three criteria are somewhat subjective. Health and safety less so, but an undefined common welfare is certainly open to question. These ownership rights can be viewed on a scale or a spectrum, with the owner being allowed to do whatever he chooses with his property on one hand, and zero control of the owner's property on the other hand. So there's a broad range in there where we can impose regulations and remove certain rights from property owners. Deciding where, as a community, we stand on that scale, where we want to draw the line, would go a long way toward making all of your jobs easier. When you're asked to make decisions like that, it would also make our property owners and residents feel much more solid and secure about what they understand they actually own when they own property in Harbor Springs. A few weeks back, John Icoangeli made a very thorough presentation about the difference between by right uses and uses that kick a property into a special review status. However, even if we designate most uses as by right, we effectively negate those rights when we impose layer upon layer of additional restrictions and requirements. The most onerous and insidious requirement that we can impose is the necessity of pleasing all neighbors in whatever objections they might voice. This requirement has the real potential of moving the needle on the scale all the way to the far end of no rights whatsoever. I urge you, for the benefit of the community as well as the simplification of your decision-making processes, to seriously consider where we should draw the line between allowing freedom of ownership right be overshadowed by the desires and the objections of neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Other comments? But Jeff?
Let's see you back. Thank you. So I'm back to ask why.
Please,
I'm sorry.
please introduce yourself.
Oh, I'm sorry, Jeff James. I asked two simple questions at the March 6th Planning Commission meeting. Question one, why would the citizens and taxpayers of Harbor Springs want or need smaller lots? Want or need more density? Question two, why would the citizens and taxpayers want or need build by right language in the zoning code? Why do you want to give up our current landowner rights in favor of potential development? Now that the city of Harbor Springs is thankfully no longer part of the ROC, needing to check boxes for Lansing or trying for that designation, these questions need to be answered by you for the current citizens of Harbor Springs, or these two items need to be dropped from the new zoning code that your committee is drafting. As far as question number one, I also attended the March 20 Planning Commission meeting here, where one of the agenda items was named presentation density. Mr. Mulder shared a lot of pictures and numbers that use a lot of skewed assumptions to fulfill his agenda for smaller lots and more density, but still did not answer the question, why is this needed? Why is more density good for the current citizens? Why does what we currently have not work? He did show that it could be possibly done, but did not answer why. With that, what I believe to be a huge conflict of interest due to the number of housing boards this chairman represents, it is imperative that this question needs to be answered, or it needs to be dropped from the proposed zoning language. It's a simple question, why? As far as question number two, I was advised at the 3/6/25 meeting to watch the previous meeting that discussed build by right. Again, no answer as to why. I would add at the 4/17/25 Planning Commission, I think it was the Zoning Commission meeting on YouTube at 44 minutes and 45 seconds time frame, Jeff Grimm talking about Jane Bulgara not supporting her neighbor's proposed ADU stated that the neighbors should be notified and heard from if something could affect that neighbor's home price. Again, please answer the question or drop the language before the proposed new zoning code goes to City Council for approval. Lastly, we know that Bluff Gardens acreage has been sold. We know there's been a large down payment made, and we know the balloon payment's due in June, at which time transfer of title will take place. So far, it is not. Preliminary plans are for 42 homes, Kenny, on approximately 8 acres and includes a clubhouse. This blows all speculation of future home growth that Bill Boulder explained at the March 20th meeting. If you can't answer why to these two simple questions cannot be answered, then why? Then vote. The vote should be no and left as is. We are not part of the ROC anymore, do not need to bow to Lansing anymore. It is so interesting that the division of Harbor Springs started about 5 years ago when the agenda to change this town became so obvious. Why is this needed? It's a simple question, why? Thank you all very much.
Okay. Okay.
Brenda Miller, I just have a question, maybe Bill, maybe Jeff Grimm, you could answer. Is Beckett and Rader, does the city of Harbor Springs have a contract with them, with Beckett and Rader?
I believe so. I mean, he does work for us. I don't think it's just on an hourly basis, so.
That he does with Beckett and Rader as a whole?
Historically, the city of Harbor Springs has had a planning consultant before Beckett and Rader. It was Larry Nix with Williams and Works out of Grand Rapids.
Right.
And when he retired, we did institute a contract with Beckett and Rader for them to provide us with planning.
Is there does that come up or can be renegotiated or eliminated? I mean, Beckett and Rader pretty much lines up with RRC. He doesn't seem to be changing. I mean, this zoning and planning to me is just another it's reworded zoning of what was brought up in the referendum and voted down. It's exactly what Kosky is doing. And why is Beckett and Raider, why are we asking Beckett and Raider when we need 30 feet of cement? Why do we have to ask them? I'm just curious why they're still around and kind of throwing around so much power on decisions. It really should be the decision, I think, you know, the taxpayers or homeowners. You see, Beckett and Raider seems pretty RRC lined up, that's what I'm saying. And if we're no longer in an RRC, then I would think Beckett and Raider and Mr., I can't pronounce his last name, that he should be changing his tune and maybe listening to a few people. I don't understand why we have to go to them for every single thing. As Jeff said, we're not bowing down to Lansing anymore in an RRC. So, thank you.
Okay, any other public comment? Anybody on Zoom here? There's a hand up?
Nobody has their hand raised.
Okay, good. Well, then let's go to new and old business. And I like that. We had a quick item on there. Our student representative, Annika, missed the last meeting because she was at the Robotic Team World Championships in Houston. Is that right, Annika? And was that a good experience?
It was.
Yeah.
Good way to end senior year.
And what was your role?
I'm the safety captain on the team, so I make sure no one on the team gets hurt.
Oh, okay.
Anybody get hurt?
And how did you score on the first day?
First day we were 5-0, so we were in 7th place. And then second day we fell to 41st. But it all depends on who you're paired with. But we played one match where it was just 2 robots against 3.
Oh, well.
So yeah. But it was a really good experience.
No, congrats. Yes. How fun. Okay. Let's see, in terms of our next order of business, we're going to take a look at the red lines from Articles 7 and 10, which we discussed last time.
Never got a red line, I just got a 7. Got a black line.
Yeah, John is on Zoom and you can ask him, but I think previous versions of Article 7, there was extensive red line edits, so this might be just looking at this with a clean slate, but we have reviewed this several times before.
Yeah, can we turn on John's mic?
Yeah, John, are you there?
Yeah, yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, Article 7 supplemental use regulations had, I think there was one typo error in it. So that's why I resubmitted it for review, but other than that, the second review was pretty thorough. The third review was, there's really nothing left, except I think there was one comma or one period that was missing, but I put it back on the agenda anyway.
You changed my EV charging stations, you made it much more vanilla, thank you very much.
You're welcome, thank you.
Oh, Chip, I did notice that was not in red. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
John, this is Tony Johnson. Just one thing, I guess it's kind of the index for the article at the beginning still has 721 amplified music instruments in there. So just want to make sure we get that cleaned up.
I'll take care of it, Tony. Thank you for pointing it out.
Where's that, Tony?
At the very
Yeah,
beginning.
that's in the blue box at the top.
Oh, it's in
Oh.
the, okay.
Title block.
Okay, anything else on 7? Okay, let's go to Article 10. This is our land development options, including the plan development. Anybody see any updates to?
I had nothing on Article 10.
I don't have any corrections to the changes we made either.
Well, I'd like to go to one of our residents, John Wayman, for a minute. He wrote us a detailed letter about, plan development process and what he thinks about that. Don, could you go, unmute Don? Don, are you still there?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, Don, tell us what you're thinking about this.
I've litigated the issue that I'm addressing as a second issue, but the first one is, it would seem to me as though before you can get to a qualifying standard, you would want a threshold to be proved in terms of the fact that the property that's going to be a planned development or proposed to be a planned development cannot be otherwise reasonably developed under the existing code. I think if that were a separate matter, then the commission wouldn't be faced with the momentum of a professionally developed architectural plan or plans that developers spend a lot of money on. And it would seem to me in a situation like that, similarly situated, it'd be hard to say no when it came to push and shove time. In any event, so the first question is whether or not you would want to have a qualifying standard. And I've kind of laid that out briefly in what I've written. The second part is the use of the word sole in two places. And if you would you look at line 64 for a starter in the red line? It reads, the use of this option shall not be for the sole purpose of avoiding the applicable zoning requirements. The rule of construction that I've litigated in the past implies that what that really means is, and I'm going to use the word or the conclusion, the use of this option may be for the primary purpose of avoiding the applicable zoning requirements. That same argument applies to line 76. And my proposal would be that you change the word sole to primary. Number one, if in fact the issue is maintaining the master plan requirements or goals, then the use of the word primary would not inhibit that at all. And that line 64B would then read, the use of this option shall not be for the primary purpose of avoiding the applicable zoning requirements. To me, that meets the intent of the master plan and avoids the problem of somebody arguing that by the use of the word sole, that simply means that a primary reason may be to avoid the zoning ordinance and to avoid density. So I would recommend strongly that the word sole be changed to primary in both of those paragraphs. That's line 64 and line 76. Now there's another another use of the word sole in here, and that has to do with sole discretion. And in fact, it is the commission's sole discretion to do one thing or another. That's an appropriate use of the word. So by way of conclusion, I recommend that you amend line 64 and line 76 to change the word sole to primary. Thank you.
Thanks, James. Well, I can't follow the legal. I don't know what to say.
Well, do we have a comment from John about that?
Or
legal counsel?
No, John, our advisor.
Oh.
Second writer.
Yeah, I wonder if that's even in his wheelhouse.
Ask him.
Let's ask him.
Yeah.
John, is that in your wheelhouse?
Well, it's not, but you know, the other, the similar word for soul is only. So if you submitted, you substituted only, it would say the use of the option shall not be for basically only the purpose of avoiding the applicable zoning requirements. But the word solely in the case of B and in Article D is pretty specific that a PD, the sole purpose of a PD is not to avoid the underlying zoning district. So that, to me, when I reference that, that provides the community with a lot more safeguard than the term primary, which means if it's primary, there could be other secondary reasons behind it. But the sole provision means that if the applicant submits a project and the planning commission determines that the reason why they're submitting the project is solely to avoid the underlying zoning, then that should be denied. So that's the reason why it's one of the qualifying standards. So, that's my interpretation of it. The planning commission has the discretion, obviously, to change the language.
I have a comment. I understand sort of two points of view here. I side with Mr. Wayman in that there could be multiple primary reasons. One primary reason, if they wanted more density, would be to use this PD as a way to get there. Sole is a higher bar. And therefore, if we traded the word primary, then it would likely bring it under more scrutiny more often or earlier. I'm not a lawyer. I think we should check with our legal counsel to see what the legal definitions and implications are for those two words, but I think it's important enough for us to address this word in those two places.
People are nodding their heads to the idea of, let's just run this by the city attorney. Is that we may be favoring primarily, but would we like to get an opinion on that?
Sure.
Or should we just cook this up ourselves? Okay. All right.
I appreciate his input because he's actually litigated this.
Yeah.
It's important to us for.
Yeah. Now, we're not gonna come this way again too soon, so it's time to get it right.
All right, good. Karen Outfield, you.
Hi, Karen Outfield. So I was thinking that maybe if we could understand the story about how how he litigated a situation. And maybe we could use that to understand it a little bit better. And then I'd like to hear from John at Becken and Rader to see how they've used it before in zoning codes.
John, have you used similar language to this? John Icoangeli?
Yes, we have.
Okay. Anything ever pop up on that or any trouble? John, have you had any communities have any trouble with this language or because of the language?
No, we have not.
All right. Well, let me get with John Wayman then and get a little more detail so I can convey that to the city attorney. And we'll get some more info on that. Good, all right. Thanks on that. And then John Wayman's first point was that, now let me see, check me as I restate this, that no one should bring a plan development request unless the first thing it does is provide some benefit to the community. John, did I say that right? John Wayman. Okay, well, assume I said that right.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
It's I'm trying to figure out how to use this software. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, what I'm thinking is as I understand the process, the master plan is the guidance for the zoning code. And everything should be developed under the zoning code unless practically speaking, you can't. And it would seem to me, if you're dealing with rehabilitating property or large amounts of property, if it's, yes, it could be done under the zoning code, but it doesn't make any economic sense, that's a threshold that could be established. So once meeting the threshold, then you move into the very discretionary area of the plan development. And or a piece of property, let's use the farm property outside of town. I understand that, yes, that could be developed under the existing zoning code, but there are a lot of reasons why not. And it may very well be that it's not dense enough. You know, I don't know if that's an argument or not, but the long and the short of it is, I think the bias, I would think, would be on the zoning code unless there is a clear showing that the property can't for some reason be developed under the zoning code. And one of the ways would be a financial test of some kind. I don't know. I think the consultant would be a good one to talk to about that. But in any event, and I haven't sat in your chair, so I don't know how you're facing it. But if your first plan development comes to you in a glitzy, architecturally proposed, very expensive plan for a big chunk of property, and it's pretty, and so on and so forth, I would think in your chair, it would be hard to say no to it. If it were otherwise, where you have to establish first a threshold, then the commission would then be not intimidated maybe into passing a plan, but they would in fact look to the issue of public necessity as a solo issue, and it would be easier to make a decision, and it would end up saving a developer money in developing something more sophisticated.
Okay, I get it. Thoughts on that, planning commission members?
Not sure how intimidated I would get by the glitzy architectural drawing. Just saying.
I think as we debate this, we need to keep in mind that although there isn't a threshold defining some pre-requirements for the package, there is a threshold in terms of the review process. There's pre-review, there's more formal reviews, there's public reviews that are required, where a lot of that will come about. Yeah, that's the process there. And I don't know if that would satisfy your concerns or not.
If I could add in also, I think maybe a better word than necessity is desirability. In the past, since I've been here, when we've dealt with some type of a plan development, what has historically happened is the applicant comes in and says, here's what I could do by right. And shows what that would look like. And then follows it up with, but I think the community would like this better, that I think it's more desirable. And then has asked for, here are the portions of the zoning code that we would need to massage to permit this plan development to happen as opposed to the by right. And that's been the basis and start of the conversation for the planning commission. It's also then provided some of the background to show us how much they're really asking for in their request. If it's a matter of density where, you know, by right, they could do 20 homes and now they're asking for 23, that's a minimal increase versus if they were asking for 30, that's a more substantial increase. And we get to see the relationship of what they could do versus what they're asking. So I think desirability as opposed to necessity might be the better word to look at as far as how things are shaping and where our conversations are coming from, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree with Jeff. It seems to me that if we're going to basically say that we aren't gonna consider planned development unless we can prove that it can't be, whatever is being proposed can't be developed in the context of the current zoning ordinance, it doesn't allow for the possibility that the result might actually be better than what could be developed under the current planned under the current zoning code. So I think we should just kind of stay where we're at.
Yeah, my thought is if somebody has a creative idea for their property, the community should hear about it. And, we shouldn't stifle it before it even, sees the light of day. And planning commission's pretty savvy, and I don't think that we're gonna be blown away or intimidated by something that looks glitzy. And then, we would only recommend or not recommend. It's city council that would decide, and they're a pretty tough group. So, I feel like we've got good language here. And I would like to see creative proposals. So, should we leave it as is then?
That would be my
All right. All right, so then the action item I'm taking away is to speak with the city attorney about solely versus primarily. After getting a bit of background from resident John Wayman about his experience with that.
And pardon me, just reference line 64 and 76, just for context.
Thank you. All right, thanks.
I appreciate his input.
Yeah, thank you, Jen. All right, then we are ready to crack into Article 5 for the first time.
There's a hand.
Oh,
Just a quick question, Bill.
Yeah.
Can I suggest that we strike price points from line 111? I'm not sure why the city would be involved in influencing prices. It's not really your role, so why even put it in there? Market should determine those. I can't see why the city should be influencing or commenting on pricing. Line 111, price points, bullet 7.
10.2.4 is the section.
I have it pulled up. Yeah, thanks, Jeff. So again, this is in a section that we talked about quite a bit at the last meeting. We're not necessarily requiring that an applicant meet all 7 of these, but that they would need to meet 4 of the 7. And that if that's something that they choose to do, it is an option, but not required. Well, why would you even want to be seen as influencing prices? That should be market driven. It shouldn't really have anything to do with approving a development.
In the master plan, it says something about a diversity across the income spectrum. I can't tell you in the housing market, right?
Yeah.
That's
Right,
what-
and I would suggest that that's an opportunity for a developer to show that he's hitting this price point as a positive thing. And so he can use that to get his project through.
I appreciate that. The only concern I'd have is I wouldn't want that to be looked at some point by the city council or planning as here's a way we can influence low income housing because you're putting that in your plan, Mr. or Mrs. Developer. So we like that because it follows this code. I think that's shaky ground. I get the intention. I think that's honorable. I just don't want us to move into, well, see, this is low income housing. So you're fulfilling one of the requirements. See, isn't that nice? That really shouldn't be the role of city to decide that. Market should be deciding that.
And I don't see, I understand what you're saying, but I don't see it as, and low income housing has to be one of those options. I don't see the city establishing what those price points are. It's just saying, you know, a mix of price points. I don't see the city as establishing what those price points are. I don't see the words low income housing or luxury style pricing or I don't see that in there. I think it fits well with the wording of that sentence. And it is, and again, it is one of, it's that section dictates that 4 of those 7 standards need to be met. And I just don't see that. I don't see it as the city dictating price points.
I'm not saying you're dictating, I'm saying you're influencing.
Let's go to Mark for a minute while we think about.
I see that reference there when I read it as simply a benchmark or a metric point for indicating diversity. I don't see it as influencing the market in any way, shape, or form. It's just a marker that can be used to indicate diversity. And that's consistent with the master plan. I also agree with your previous assessment that if something like the planned development actually enhances, like you said, Bob, the application of the master plan, we shouldn't in any way discourage that sort of thing. I think we made a very good decision there.
And I might add that, thank you, John, for moving up what was formally number 5 in that section, which was to promote the goals and objectives of the city of Harbor Springs master plan, because I had brought up that shouldn't be an option. That should be a given. And thank you for bumping that up to the previous section. And then we just made it, instead of 4 out of 8, 4 out of 7. Thank you.
Okay, any other concerns out of that? All right, thank you. Karen?
Yeah, I'm just curious if Beckett and Rader have anything to add about using the words price points. If he's worried about it, is this something typically done for PDs or PUDs?
Okay, over to John Angeli. Any concern about using price point?
No, I have no concerns about it. I think a developer that's coming in to propose housing would want to disclose what the price points of the housing units are going to be. And I think the community would want to know what the price points are going to be, what the range of values are going to be.
Yeah, we'd certainly be asking that.
Yes.
I would also say, Bill, that if the argument against using price points is that it should be market driven, then you could make that argument for everything in that sense, the diverse mix of housing. I mean, it's
the size, the type.
exactly.
I think the market's already spoken on most of this.
Yeah, yes.
And it will
In
continue.
Harbor Springs, it will continue.
That's a good point. All right, thanks. So we're good to leave it, other than our outstanding question about solely versus primarily. All right, then let's get on to Article 5. And John, can you tell us what the purpose of Article 5 is? General provisions.
Yes, Article 5 is appropriately titled General Provisions because these provisions are applicable throughout the city regardless of zoning district. So these are the provisions that Jeff, as the zoning administrator, usually has his eyes on when people are coming in looking for a zoning permit or taking some action on their property. So, like I said, these are provisions that apply throughout the community. They're not affiliated with any particular zoning district.
Got it. All right. Planning Commission members, what do you see?
I guess, go for it.
Go ahead.
Okay, I tried to review Article 5 and then I tried to compare it to the existing plan. A lot of similar words for sure. But is there anything kind of in the new plan that's not addressed in the old or vice versa?
Good question. So I think there's one change that actually I was just talking with somebody about the other day. And that's how we handle corner lots. So if and that's in this section. In the old zoning code, the way that we addressed a corner lot, we have a property that fronts on two different streets. And the old zoning code says that you have your front yard with a front yard setback. And then the other street face would be what was called a corner side yard, which also essentially had a front yard setback. But the key was in the name, corner side yard. So, because the language in the old zoning code says that the opposite of your front yard is your rear yard. So where we have a front yard setback of, let's use our most largest neighborhood, where we had a front yard setback of 20 feet, the rear yard setback would be 30 feet. And then you have your side yard setback on a normal inside lot of, let's say, 8 to 12 feet on each side. Whereas when you have a corner lot, you'd have a front yard setback of 20, the opposite would be a rear yard setback of 30. But then you had another front yard setback of 20, even though it was the corner side yard. So then the opposite of that one was the other side yard at 8 to 12. The difficulty there with two front yard setbacks is it really creates a very small buildable envelope on a lot. That made it more difficult for people to fully utilize a corner lot. And I think that's why historically in Harbor, we've seen corner lots be double lots so that they had more room to be able to build. And that's not typical in other communities. In other communities, what seems to be more typical is that if you have a corner lot with essentially two front yard setbacks, the zoning code would kind of compensate that property owner and not punishing them by having a rear yard setback, but having two front yards and then two side yards to kind of bring them back a little bit of that buildable envelope that they lost with that extra front yard setback. And so that's one change that we have made from the old code to the new code, is going from on a corner lot, a front yard, rear yard, and side yard. The new code has front yard, side yard, to kind of give them back a little bit of that buildable envelope that they previously had lost. So that's one proposed change. We discussed that a little bit at the full planning commission. We discussed it, I think, more at a committee level when we came up with that change. I think that's about the only one that I can really think of that was a change from before. Some of the wording may have been massaged and updated a little bit, but I think that's really the only thing that's that we know that we purposely changed. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions about any of these sections that I can kind of talk about? And a lot of this is maybe to do less with uses of the buildings and setbacks, and more to do with things like where motor vehicles can be stored, that they need to be in a paved driveway, or recreational vehicles that need to be in a side yard or a rear yard. It's where we have a lot of that language that we would refer to. That is more, let's say, on the side of me doing enforcement action if somebody's not doing what the city code or the zoning code requires them to do.
But the requirements to have a paved area, stuff like that, doesn't appear to be any different from the new versus the old.
I don't believe so. I believe if we look at that language and we can.
Yeah, it looks pretty similar to me, but.
Yeah.
Okay, Tony, go.
Yeah, I have a couple of things that I noted down for discussion and a couple of formatting issues. So we can go through them intermittently with others, or so section 5.6 basement dwellings. I was a little confused by this section. No building consisting of a basement only should be erected. I understand that. And then we talk about basements may be occupied if they have been approved as an accessory dwelling unit. Okay, now I've read this again and said it out loud. I think my answer is cleared. I read this as if the ADU had a basement, it could.
Oh.
But I was thinking, well, what about a house basement? But okay. It's a little clearer to me now.
Let's read it.
Yes, it does.
I think the intent of this is that we don't have a structure that's basement only.
Yep.
And then something that's used, yeah.
Okay, I think I'm good with that now.
All right, what's next?
I've got to refresh my memory here. Oh. 7, 8, are we worried about small editorial typographical issues or? Cause I've got about 4 of them through this section.
I mean,
Okay.
yeah,
Line 67, there's an errant space before a comma, middle of the line.
Oh, no.
oh yeah, after existing grades.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay,
I have those too.
line 70. Okay, we're talking about the zoning administrator. In the start of the second sentence, can we change he to zoning administrator? Just to keep it
Okay, a little
gender
bit.
neutral.
Or they,
They's fine. My next one's line 142. An accessory building remaining on a property following the demolition of the principal structure shall be maintained in good condition. Of course, we want it to be maintained, but why would we do we allow an accessory structure without a house to be built in the first place?
no, we would not allow somebody to, let's say they have a vacant lot and they just want to build a garage.
Mhm.
That's not permitted right now in the city of Pepper Springs. There could be, through various reasons, a situation that might bring that to occur. Usually we address it at the time. It could be, let's say that someone has an existing home with an detached accessory building and they're tearing their home down to rebuild a new home. That might be a situation where for a period of time, there is an accessory building on its own. There may be, through certain opportunities, let's say that a property owner has a large piece where they have their house on a portion of their lot and an accessory building, and then they split the property to sell one half or the other. That there might be a period of time where an accessory building is then on a vacant piece, but generally speaking, we do not permit an accessory building to be built without a principal building along with it.
So why would we allow an accessory building to remain after the demolition of a principal structure? Or could there be a time limit maybe put there? Or some other language to talk about its uses? To me, this says you can keep an accessory building there, right, ad nauseum after you demolish a structure.
Well, so this is specifically in the demolition of buildings section.
Mhm.
So I think the idea here is that through the demolition process, that we don't want to have an accessory building sitting there looking poorly. So I think it's very specific to the demolition of buildings, where that language would come into play. We can update that to something more.
Isn't your issue, Tony, if somebody decides, if there's an accessory dwelling on a parcel, and somebody decides to demolish the primary residence?
Right.
Could we find ourselves in a situation where they just don't rebuild and there's an accessory dwelling there forever?
Accessory building.
Yeah, accessory building.
That's the way I was reading that as I didn't see a way that what Bob just said was addressed here. Yes, it's in the demolition section, but there's no subsection D did not tell me that there was a time limit that building could remain.
Right.
But the introduction talks about how demolition shall be completed in a reasonable time.
Demolition doesn't talk about reconstruction.
Okay, is that worth putting a time limit on? Is
I
it?
think so.
Okay,
I agree. Yeah. Good connection.
so we want to open the bidding?
What do you recommend? For the duration until another building is built or something like that, or years?
Well, I presumably, right. So you could apply for a demolition permit without a building permit to rebuild something, couldn't you?
Let me back up the conversation slightly here. So let's say that I had a property that had a house and a detached garage on it. And for whatever reasons, I feel the need to demolish the home, it's condemned or whatnot. If I do that and demolish that home, I've created a situation where I now have an accessory building on the property that does not have a primary use to go with it. Our zoning code doesn't permit that. So I've created a situation where my property now, potentially temporarily or long-term, has an existing nonconformity with it. I'm not compliant with the zoning code. So that's gonna bring in some other sections of this code on what I might need to do to address that situation. This section that we're looking at here is just regarding the demolition of buildings and that process. So we're stating that the zoning administrator needs to issue a demolition permit. So then part of that process could be if we want to specify some type of a time limit that existing nonconformity must be rectified within. I think we should get some feedback from John Icoangeli on this.
But if you have a home and you have a garage and the home is condemned and it has to come down, but there's nothing wrong with the garage, are we forcing somebody to take down a garage that's in perfect shape? And having them take on that expense?
It doesn't state that. All right, existing nonconformities can continue. Right, it just limits what you can do with the property. Like, let's say, for instance, that I've taken down my garage because it was condemned. If I came back and said I want to build an addition to make my garage bigger, that we probably would have to say no to that. Right, they would be able to keep their garage and keep it in good maintenance. We're actually stating here through this process that they need to keep it in good repair. John, do you have any thoughts on existing nonconformities and how it pertains to this, or is that a rabbit hole that I'm going down that isn't needed?
No, I think if you end up with an accessory building on a lot by itself as a result of demolition, then the lot and the structure then becomes non-conforming, and we have to address it under the non-conforming provisions. We certainly would not we would not allow an accessory building to be built on a property without a principal structure. But there could be, as Jeff had mentioned, there could be a situation where a building needed to be demolished that had a perfectly good garage on the property. And I guess it's a policy decision. Would the city would the city require the property owner to also demolish a perfectly good garage, or you would move it either in the non-conforming status, or you could put a time frame saying that it can stay on the property. We could put something in a condition that if a principal structure wasn't built on the property within such a time frame, that building would have to be removed. That's fairly aggressive, but I think that's where Tony was going with it, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct, yes. I just didn't want that to be a loophole to have a garage only on a lot that stays there forever.
Historically, it has happened occasionally. It's not something that I think is rampant. I can think of a couple properties offhand where it's, there's one or two I can think of where there's been a garage on a lot and that's all that's there. I think many of them, or most of them that I can think of, probably are sold that they predate zoning where we created the limitation that prevents that now. So I really don't think that that's a large concern. It's certainly something to be aware of.
Jeff, what is the city's recourse if that situation were to surface? If the home was demolished because it was condemned, but a perfectly fine garage is sitting there?
Well, I mean, again, it's existing nonconformity, right?
Right.
So, and we have, Harbor Springs is an old community. We have a lot of existing nonconformities throughout town. And the typical situation is, as long as they continue to exist, we allow them to remain. A property owner can keep an existing nonconformity, they can maintain it, keep it in good repair. The limitation that we have in the zoning code is that they cannot make that existing nonconformity worse. They can't enlarge it.
Right.
So in a situation with, let's say that garage on a vacant lot, we would allow it to continue. It would create some limitations on what they could do with the property until that existing nonconformity is resolved. It would certainly prevent them from increasing it, let's say making the garage bigger. The way that it would be resolved would be, I think, in one of two ways. The property owner would then build a principal building to bring it back into conformity with the code. Or the property owner would, at some point in time on their own, remove the building. And that would then trigger where if they voluntarily remove the building moving forward, they wouldn't be permitted to rebuild the accessory building and say, well, I had a garage there, I'm gonna put it back. That's when the code would say, no, now you need to bring the property into compliance with the code. Before you can put a new garage on there, there has to be a primary building to go with it. Did that answer?
Yes.
I mean, given the property values of Harbor Springs, that'd be a great use of property to just have a garage on it, typically.
No, but it would also not be a desirable neighbor if you happen to be in that neighborhood.
Yeah. Well, given that this doesn't happen very often, it seems like, because what we're really doing is, it could be, everything could be in conformance until the principal dwelling is removed, the principal structure, then it becomes a non-conformity. And we really can't create non-conformities.
Yeah.
So therefore, we have to say something along the lines that has a time period. Like, so I would make like 2 years, because if you think about the time of construction, if it's a significant house, they take 2 years to build,
Right.
period. And the chances are they wouldn't tear it down until something new was designed, so they don't, end up in the position where they're tearing down something that maybe was slightly not conforming, like say it was in the setback or something like that. So all that would be approved before they would demo. They'd be rather silly to demo without having dotted their i's and crossed their t's. But I think a time limit is certainly reasonable, and that's where it gets us out of that little gray area. And I would just suggest, think about maybe 2 years, or I don't think it'd be less than 2 years.
But would it be more than 2 years?
Well, I think there'd be a chance for them to come back to staff and say, administratively, ask for an extension.
Right.
I think that's very
Showing good
reasonable.
faith
Because
progress.
it takes a long time to build stuff. It just does, way longer than any of us wanted to.
So if there was a nice lot and a nice young family came along and had a garage underneath and living quarters upstairs, and they wanted to build that first, live there when they were able to go through some years, raise a family, the land would be set aside for their main house. So would that be something that you wouldn't allow? What we do in the horse business a lot is we have this come up all the time. Can you build the stable first, or do you build the house first? And so, for instance, if you took the property over in Weequahic, and let's just say the family, they've demolished the big house and they still have a small house on it. What if they just decided, the land is so beautiful, let's just live in the small house and not build the big house? So I think there's lots of opportunity that if you guys word this properly, you might find some young people that would be able to afford to have a lot and build something first before a big house.
Historically, we haven't done that. I think a concern that I think we should be aware of, and it may be, a concern that's not needed, but I think sometimes we have to look at, potential worst case scenarios. What if somebody comes in and promises that they're gonna build the house after they do that, but then they only build the carriage house, the garage with living above, and they never do the next step? how do you go back to that person and force them to do that? And that's, I think, I could be wrong, but I think that's why we have it in the zoning code that the principal building needs to be built before the accessory building.
So Tony,
Yeah.
you want time?
Yeah, I've got a suggestion. Let after the end of that sentence, shall be maintained in good condition, period. I have, in this instance, comma, a principal structure shall be constructed within 3 years of the date of demolition, or the accessory structure shall be required to be demolished
Or removed.
or removed.
That's completely fine with me.
I think 3 years is good too. That's good. It might be a little too tight.
Good.
I think Karen's point though, like, somebody did want to build a carriage house and live above it for a year or 2 or 5. Does that hurt us? Does that hurt the community? Did that help the community?
I'd like to ask what the health and safety ramifications of this are.
Yeah, good question. I don't know what those would be. Right now, we don't allow a dwelling that isn't on the first floor, right?
Yeah, and that's maybe another good question, is do we want to relook at what we consider a primary residence to be? Right now, the code states that there needs to be a certain percentage. I have to look at the language that we use, that there needs to be a certain percentage or something of living on the first floor. And if we want to look at that and change our minds, we can certainly do that. If a carriage house as a principal building is something we're okay with, that's fine. I will say there has been interest from property owners in Harbor Springs to do that, if that's something that we wanted to entertain.
It wouldn't be in this section. Probably.
That's a good question of what, I think we would look at that maybe in our definitions section, because we have, I think, some language there of what defines a principal structure and a residence and whatnot.
All right, well, why don't we?
To be clear and for the record here, I'm actually fully in support of that. This issue is to do with demolition, so it's a separate issue.
Yeah.
But I'd love to discuss the other item that we've been talking about.
Then
but-
why don't we plan to discuss that when we get into that, whatever the right section is for that. It sounds like we have a proposal on the table to go ahead and just put a 3-year, a 2 or a 3-year limit on how long an accessory building can exist if the principal structure is removed. And
When the principal structure is demolished
or removed.
or removed, yes.
Okay, who prefers 2 years or 3 years? Let's get a
3
years. Flip some fingers.
Go with John.
Oh, it sounds like 3. Okay, back to Karen.
So what if the garage, you guys keep referring to the garage, what if it has a living quarters above it?
Yeah,
And does it still have to be demolished?
let's, I'm thinking for this section, we say there is a 3-year limit. Let's think about though, if we want to redefine what a principal structure is in whatever section that is, then if this conflicts, we'll have to come back and get it. Okay, hey, great points. Thank you, everybody. All right, Tony, what else you got?
All right, I'm more than halfway through my list. Line 187. So now we're talking about emergency temporary buildings, fully in support. It's come up recently. I don't have an issue, but on 187, the temporary building should be connected to public sewer and water. Sewer is not in every part of the city, so we need to tweak the language there a little bit to simply say if these utilities are available to the parcel or something along those lines. So the last thing they're going to do is require them to connect to sewer that's not there.
We could put comma if available. And maybe it's appropriate then to add after that or well and septic. As determined by I think the idea is that we don't want a temporary dwelling to just not be connected to anything.
Fully in support, agree. But it does say public sewer, and that is not available everywhere.
Yeah, Tony, I picked up on that same line. I agree with your comments. I was wondering whether it's appropriate to say that it needs to be connected to the sewer if it's available for a 1 year time frame. Is, you know, it's only gonna be there for a year. I'm fine with that. I just wonder if that's practically doable or not. I don't know. To connect and then unconnect a year later after you get rid of the thing.
It's easier to disconnect than change or connect. And also, we should be, this is a minor point, but it should be sanitary sewer. Because we also have storm sewers too, so it just should be sanitary.
John, did you have sanitary sewer rather than public sewer?
Stormwater.
Yeah, right. We'll figure it out here. That
Just a minor thing.
right, Tony, what else you got?
All right, next two are simply formatting line. It's actually section 517 and 518. They should be the indexing should be removed there to line up with the format for all sections that don't have subsections to start with. Hopefully that's clear. Next one is on line 222. No motor vehicle shall be parked in any yard except on a paved surface. That would, a paved surface, and certainly the way I understand it, would exclude a gravel surface. Is that the intent?
So that is language straight from the old zoning code. That has been the intent. We certainly have situations in Harbor Springs where people have gravel driveways that are existing nonconformities. The idea here is that if you're going to park your vehicle, your motor vehicle outside, that it would be on a like the apron to your garage or some type of paved surface or paved drive.
Okay, so any existing gravel driveways would be existing nonconformities, is what you're.
Correct.
Okay, so then requiring a paved surface for a new structure, I assume here that.
But what about brick pavers or concrete pavers? Where does it all start and stop?
So that is something that I think we should probably readdress. The existing code says asphalt, concrete, or other bituminous material. And I looked up bituminous because I didn't know what it means. It basically means asphalt.
It's asphalt.
So I think that there are certainly a lot more ideas out there for what could be some type of a driveway.
Well, we talked about resiliency, we've talked about green design and green infrastructure, and there's a lot of products that are out there. And even gravel handles water much better than asphalt does.
I think the concern with gravel in us trying to get away from people putting in new gravel driveways is gravel has a tendency to make its way out into the public street and into the sanitary or the storm sewer. And the Department of Public Works doesn't like that. So they're trying to help encourage us to get away from gravel, but I think any other hard surface that prevents, that's not loose. But you're correct, there are a lot of other choices. There's the bricks that have some grass that grows up between them. There's other types of.
Pervious concrete, pervious asphalt.
Yes.
Right, so I think modifying our language of what constitutes a paved surface somewhere, wherever we want to define that.
Is that in that definition section?
I think that might be, well, John, if we can figure that out. But if you guys are open to opening that up to other ideas other than asphalt and concrete, I think the DPW would prefer is that we don't include loose surfaces like gravel.
We can park something like that in our front yard.
Well,
I think you could get, his front yard and side yards are both okay. With pavement.
Yeah, in a paved driveway, whether that driveway is coming into the front yard to the home or to the side yard, yeah.
Vanessa, do you want to come up with a term or a language that would be inclusive of
Other products?
Well,
or John?
Mr. Chairman, this is John. Let me suggest the term pervious pavers includes a wide scope of different materials that are out there in the marketplace. So you could just say concrete, asphalt, and pervious pavers.
Pervious, okay.
The city has a parking lot right down here. There are plastic inserts.
Yeah.
That's pervious paver.
Yeah, that's a pervious paver.
Okay, John has the word.
Yeah, that's it.
Great.
All right, we're gonna have to go on a little bit of a exploration here. 234. So we're talking about parking boats on an individual's lot shall not be stored in any front yard or any side yard. I think that's what I wanted to pick up there. If we go to section 525, recreational vehicles on line 484. The outdoor storage of recreational vehicles shall be subject to the following: be limited to one stored in a rear yard and one stored on a paved driveway. So assume the paved driveway is in the front or the side yard. There seems to be some conflict there.
So there, we also have to take into consideration that there is some language in the city code that addresses where vehicles or recreational vehicles can be stored. The city code has some language in it that states that vehicles or recreational vehicles may be stored on a paved drive. So we don't want to put anything in our zoning code that would conflict with that.
Yep.
So that's why we have that language here. To basically say it can be stored in a paved drive or in a rear yard.
Okay, I agree with that. So in 234, it does seem, or 234, and not be stored within any front yard or side yard.
So I would like to ask the planning commission for some thoughts on this. So in 234, where we say not in a front yard or a side yard, I'd like you to consider the possibility of allowing property owners to store recreational vehicles in a side yard. We have some situations in town, especially on corner lots. The rear yard is exceptionally small on a corner lot. I believe we have some diagrams there that describe what is a front yard, side yard, rear yard. So there are some situations where it is just not possible for a property owner to park a boat, even if it's a modest sized boat, in a rear yard. We have some situations in town where they have parked in side yards, and it can be done with minimal negative impact on neighbors. If that's something that you guys think is appropriate to change, but that would be a change. I believe our existing language says not in front or side, which limits it to rear. If that's something that you think would be appropriate to modify, or if we would still like to stay with rear yard only on that. And certainly feedback from the community.
So I agree, we should have that conversation, but my point here is there is already a conflict in the same document that says we can put them in section 525, we can have one in a side yard, but on line 234, it says we can't.
Where was the other section that said, I'm sorry?
It's section 525, line 484. The outdoor storage of recreational vehicles shall be subject to the following: be limited to one stored in the rear yard and one on a paved driveway. A paved driveway could be in the side yard. At least at my place. I'm trying to cause trouble here.
I think, let me just give you some context here. Maybe Jeff has already. There's a difference between parking a motor vehicle or recreational vehicle if somebody's coming in they're parking it in order to get their boat ready or get their RV ready to go on vacation. There's a difference on storage. So the question is to the community, do you want people to store like over the season, the season that they're not using it? Do you want people to store in their front yards or in their side yards, their boats and their RVs? So that's a question that you have to ask yourself. And then that'll help us in terms of how we structure the language. So there's a difference between like temporarily parking, you know, to get things ready to go, or maybe you bring your boat and have it in your driveway for a couple of days before you go back out to the lake. This is really storing the vehicle like for months at a time in the front or the side yard of your house. And it's totally different by community. Some communities don't have a problem with it. Other communities do not want people to be storing their recreational vehicles in their front yards or in their side yards. So it's a local decision.
The other importance here, I think, is in section 525, we're also specifying the number, wherein I think the first one, we don't have, I'd have to look. But I think if we were to do something to change this, I think it would be appropriate that in 519C, that we would add in or in a paved driveway. That way we're not conflicting with the city code, we're taking it into consideration.
I think that's a fine solution to what I see as a contradiction.
Potential conflict.
Okay, you want to repeat that for John Nicolangelo,
No.
Jeff?
Did you get that, John, or?
No, go ahead, Jeff. Give it to me again.
So the city code states that recreational vehicles, I believe, can be parked in a paved drive. And sometimes people have their paved drive in their front yard. So maybe in somewhere in section C here in 519,
Okay.
where we state not in a front yard or rear yard, maybe we just add unless in a paved drive.
Okay.
And then that would not, I don't think that would conflict with 484, where we're then stating that we're creating the limitation on one can be in a rear yard and one can be in a paved drive. So essentially people would be able to have two recreational vehicles at their property. That might be a change from the old code. I'd have to go back and look. I'm not certain that the old code has a limit on the number of recreational vehicles.
And would it be helpful if we gave you a decision right now on whether or not side yards would be okay for parking a recreational vehicle?
At least a discussion maybe, to get your ideas and thoughts on that, if you think that would be an appropriate change, or if it's something we don't want to do, we could come back and look at this at another time in the future as well.
Just see if there's a quick consensus on it.
Was there, we going to differentiate between the 2 week time limit and permanent storage?
Okay, so that's, so what do you need, a decision from us on permanent storage or
Right, totally.
permanent storage or just short term?
I don't like it permanently.
Side yard.
Yeah,
Okay.
but that's temporarily, if they're working on it, they're getting it ready. I'm not sure that much.
What if they shrink wrap it and put it there in the winter? Is that temporary or is that permanent?
It's permanent.
It's storage.
Or storage. Okay, let's see, we have to remember also that probably 25% of our properties in the city are also under a homeowners association, resort association, and this is always a rule that they have.
Yeah.
So this applies to only 25% of the properties, or 75% of the properties in the city. And Jeff, it's kind of uncomfortable, right? Because sometimes people do have them in their side yards and they don't have a choice.
Well, honestly, I think the times where this is become an issue, potential, conflict, are on corner lots. Because remember, the front yard is anything between the home and the street. The side yard is then, so the rear yard is really the area behind. So when you have a corner lot, you have this tiny little square in the opposite corner of the streets that is the only portion that is their rear yard. So it's very, very small. So maybe, what would you feel about allowing the storage of recreational vehicles in a side yard for corner lots and not for internal lots? If that would be a way, because that's really, I think, where we see this issue cropping up, where they don't have another place to store it.
I would just feel that a side yard on a corner lot's worse.
Yeah.
Well, excuse me, but these are general provisions, we're talking primarily residential here. That's where the concern comes in, right?
Yeah.
So maybe this doesn't belong in general conditions. Maybe this is part of, for the residential zoning districts, because in commercial, all the other commercial districts, business districts, it seems like this isn't applicable. Because, the side yard sizes are different, and, all the setbacks are different. And the expectations are different, that perhaps it would be reasonable to have storage of an RV in a commercial property. Perhaps, but it doesn't seem like this is universally across all the zoning districts.
No, and I think we'll see that in a few of these, that where they're going to apply more in residential situations than commercial. And then we'll probably see some other ones that may apply more in commercial situations than residential.
And I think it's specified here, resident, on a residential lot, well, I guess. C is, resident or property owner, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
All right, I was just wondering if we could get quick consensus on it. If we could nail it. If not, we can talk about it some more. What's your pleasure?
Well, what are we specifically?
I say, let me call the question. The question is, should we allow storage of RVs and boats in side yards? Inside yard, period.
See, again, there's temporary and permanent.
Yeah, I'm figuring by saying storage, it means permanent or
Okay.
seasonal.
Long term.
Long term.
I don't think, an RV or boat should be stored in a front or side yard. In a residential area.
I agree.
In residential.
Okay.
In any residential.
All right.
I think,
In any residential.
yes, parking. On a temporary basis, but
Okay.
if
All right. Sounds like we do have a consensus that we're not ready to allow it in a side yard. Karen.
So usually when people have these RVs, they bring them to their house for overflow guests, things like that. So you guys aren't sort of addressing that idea. And so is this,
it isn't.
is this in the same area?
That is addressed in here, and I believe the language we have is that we allow recreational vehicles to be stored. We do not allow them to be occupied. So somebody could bring in and they can store an RV or something on their property, if they're to bring it back when they're not using it. But it's not for a situation where they have guests and they need that for more space for the guests to stay. We do not permit that in the code. We didn't in the old code, and I don't believe we proposed to allow that in the new.
Thank you.
Okay, so Jeff, something we do have consensus. We're not ready to allow parking or storage inside things. Great.
That's
All right,
fine. I just wanted to bring it up because I know that's been something that people in the community have asked for, so that's fine.
Great. And what else do we have in Article 5?
I got two small editorials that we can cover in 5 seconds.
Great.
Line 493, love these errant issues. We've got an errant period at the end of of the paragraph there. And on line 564. 564, this is another instance where the text needs to be bumped back to the left. For consistency with the other formatting. I'm done, thank you.
Great. You got that one, John, 564?
Yeah.
Yep. Good. All right, around the rest of the room, any other thoughts?
I'll go.
Okay, go.
All right, Tony covered some of mine. I probably have 5 or 6, most of them small. Earlier in our discussions 2 weeks ago, we talked about adding potential for demolition or deconstruction in addition to demolition. So on line 125, there's an Article 5 bill. I just suggest that we bring that language back, deconstruction and or demolition, something like that. I don't know if there's such a thing as a deconstruction permit, whether it just goes into the category of demolition, but I just use that word in that line.
We do have language elsewhere, I believe it's in the city code, or it might be its own separate ordinance that dictates what we do for situations where a house is to be moved. And actually, we just saw a moving of a home today, if anybody was in the area at 9:30 or 10 o'clock this morning with one of the guest houses from 5 Beach Drive was taken up and out of town.
Okay, so this being about demolition, we could just let the language stand. I'm good. Line 146, which is in section 513A. This is the usual thing until we determine which districts it applies. John, I suggest you just use insert districts or something like that.
Sure.
Same thing for line, I'm moving in sequence now, all the way up to line 443. In section 522. And just refer to it as insert districts for now.
What line number was that, Kenny?
443.
Oh, okay. Got it.
Okay, thank you. Just a few more. Line 518. Section 529. A. Refresh my memory here. I think that's shipping containers, yes. So we all agree with, the intent of this, and I agree with the intent, but I'm thinking that would it be okay if a project under construction were to bring a shipping container on, let it sit at the site for some duration during the build? That happened when they redid Shea School. I think they're still up there as a matter of fact. I'm okay with it as long as it's a temporary basis related to a building. But I agree with the intent that we don't want these things to be used, as a permanent location. So this is 518 and open for discussion on this.
The only thing we could put in there is just put a comment saying unless it's associated with a construction site.
That would do what I was looking for.
And there is another nuance here that we identified earlier on, and that is, do we want to say that cargo containers cannot be used as a construction method or
Material?
I'm asking the planning commission.
Since I have the mic, I would agree with that. I don't know where that belongs in our language, if it's in this section or not, but do we want clever new construction out of containers? I think not. And if they do exist, have you had anybody ask for a design?
I've done them.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
In town?
No, in Utah.
Okay.
And the only thing I'll say is that you can use them. I think that you can use them as components. And you can do it such that they don't look like containers.
Yeah.
And so I think I'm not gonna follow my sword on this by any means, but they can be used as components of a building structure. And it works well, for example, for commercial kitchens. You can put 2 containers together and make a really good commercial kitchen. And it comes on site, they pop it in place and they build the structure around it. You don't know they're containers. you know, because it's a conventional construction surrounds them. You do the same thing with, you know, bathroom containers, and also I've used them for various different things, but they're components of the structure of the building. They're not the building itself, if that makes sense. So, but again, you know, what are we objecting to? The way containers look or the functionality of the containers? If it's the way they look, you know, that's, I can understand why people don't like that, but you know, that's a taste, and it's Harbor Springs and all that kind of stuff. I will acknowledge that. But the functionality of them, they save a lot of money and a lot of time on construction, for working construction. A lot of good stuff. But
I yield to the group. Well, you don't see it though at the end of the day, right?
no, but you can, like on the, I did one restaurant in Utah, that, you know, we use these components for, the kitchens and bathroom stuff, and for the interior, the part of the decor of the interior, but the outside, no, we don't. And, so we do that, think of it as prefab. We've done a lot of prefab buildings in not a lot, but a few in Montana, you know, with components are built, you know, that shipping containers, but they're about the size of the shipping container. You put them together and bingo, you have a 3-story residential building.
I have no issue with that. I just have an issue if it's, to your point, if it was the primary use. I've seen some of these things online where 3 or 4 of them are arranged in a certain way with stairways, and that's it.
Yeah, no, that's not what I'm talking about.
I think if I can provide a little bit of background here, I think part of the reason that this came up and was included for discussion and inclusion here is we did have a couple situations in town where a property owner just plopped down in their backyard a shipping container and called it a shed. And that came to the planning commission with some concerns, because at the time in our zoning code, we didn't really have any language that addressed that. So this was, I think, an attempt to head in that direction to address that concern, or maybe some others.
Yeah, and that's valid. And, you know, this is something we don't have to get into now. I think the way it stands right now, they're just not allowed, that's okay. If I had a project I wanted to bring, I would, you know, I would say, well, this is what we're doing, therefore we're meeting your intent. So I'll try to work around it. But I think it'd take a long time to really nuance it, you know, so it's acceptable to everybody. So we don't need to do that now. Maybe some other day.
Would it be as simple as just saying that they're acceptable as long as it's an interior component? I mean, I think what everyone is saying is they don't want to look at an you know.
Yeah, and I don't blame them, I understand.
Yeah.
Yeah, that could be it, but I think, you know, that you have to really look at the wording of that, I think. Yeah, I think it takes some time to get it right.
Yeah.
But, you know, I'm just bringing this up because, you know, I don't think it's a one and done deal. I think they're, you know, innovative uses of different structures and all that stuff will perhaps, you know, they can be done so they look very, very nice and traditional and all that kind of stuff. Or they can be done in glass boxes, you know, so.
Let me, Mr. Chairman, let me add that I think that addressing what Mark is saying, that if somebody wanted to use a shipping container inside of a building, that the mechanism, the safety or the trigger would be that they would come and they would present that to the zoning administrator, who then would say, it's not allowed, but I want to go before the zoning board of appeals for an interpretation on its use. I mean, you always have that pathway if somebody comes in with something that they need additional clarification on.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. That sounds good. So do you think this is worded correctly, Jeff? Where by shipping containers are not allowed in any zoning district, that would mean both as a storage method as well as a building method?
I mean, at some point, if it's some internal component of a home. I guess my 2-part thing here is, 1, how would I even know that there's a shipping container there? 2, has it ceased to be a shipping container that it's been modified so much? I think the concern here is that if we're walking by a property and somebody can point and say, that's a shipping container. I think we have that's where I would be able to say we certainly have an issue, right? But yeah, correct. I think that John has a good point that, at the end of the day, we get to a point where I make, an administrative review of how I'm interpreting the code, and someone can always challenge me on that. Whether it's that they want to use a shipping container and I think that it's not appropriate, or I've allowed somebody to, and a citizen doesn't like it. We can always
Okay,
look at that.
so you're the first check, and then the second check would be the zoning board of appeals. Okay, so then the question comes back to, do we think this is worded in a way that we like? Or should we?
Well, there was a proposal to add, unless used as a temporary storage structure during construction.
All right, there was, yeah. So that may be enough, maybe that's enough at this stage of our development.
And put a time limit on it as well. Define
Well,
temporary.
except, yeah, maybe
Well, I think-
during construction.
I think during construction is appropriate, because then depending on how long that construction takes, if it's a small project at a residential home, it might only be for
Sure.
6 months.
I get it.
If it's a bigger project like the school,
There's a reason those are still up there.
They're gone. Yeah, it's replaced by a shed on that pad, I believe.
A mobile home.
No,
Here's three.
I see it every day.
Okay, Kenny, what else
Okay.
you got?
Yeah, two more small ones. It's like the last one was small. Line 521. Once again, John, just go to the insert districts.
Yeah, got that, Kenny.
That out. And then the last one I have is line 564. This talks about the use of surfaces, I think. Barrier surfaces, yeah. Yeah, again, line 564.
Yes.
I agree with the language that's there. I know that it's common practice for people to have canvas and vinyl windows on their porches during the winter and the off season and so forth. So all I ask is that we add the word permanent near the end, permanent exterior surface.
Okay,
That's
Oh.
it.
Interesting.
this is another one of those sections of the code that we can date back to a specific event that happened downtown that caused the need to have this, the Tyvek Tower.
Okay, I'm in that, I've got one in that same neighborhood, and it has to do with sidewalk, that's. Let me figure out the line. 524, so. In other districts, it shall be the duty of the owner and the occupant to provide for a concrete sidewalk. Why would an occupant of a building have to provide a sidewalk?
It's a good question.
Wouldn't it only be the owner's responsibility?
Gotcha.
John and Jeff, you see any?
no, I think that's fine. It's the
Okay.
owner's responsibility.
I have some, if you like.
Yeah, go Bob.
Okay, so all the way back to line 10. So John, I'm just wondering why in this article, we refer to a chapter rather than articles.
It should be article.
Okay, so you'll just need to do a global search for that, because it's.
Yes, I see it.
Yeah, okay, cool. Line 133. I don't know what an attractive nuisance is.
Trampoline. It's an oxymoron.
No, actually, I think that's a legal term.
It is. It's like a trampoline.
Yeah, because I know, the construction industry, an attractive nuisance is something that will invite someone, like you have a ladder. And some kid comes along and they want to pull up, You want to climb up the ladder, they.
Oh, I thought it was,
That actually is a term.
I had a girlfriend that was an attractive lady.
That's called stop.
Yeah. That might be.
Oh, my wife said.
This
Okay.
meeting,
It's, okay, that's fine. Line 140. This is just a little nit, seated with an appropriate plant material, not materials.
Okay,
I got that too.
Yeah. Line 162. Let's see. Oh, my only question here is should we say that the planning commission shall require rather than is authorized to? And I don't really have a strong feeling one way or the other. But if we're talking about something as significant as moving earth and that sort of thing, should we be required to ask for a cash or a bond?
usually with a bond or a cash deposit or a guarantee, that's usually discretionary that the planning commission can or cannot do it, depending on the situation. So if you put shall in, that means it's gonna happen every time. Planning commission may have a project where it's not really required. Because these can be, getting a bond or a guarantee can be costly.
Right. I get
So
that.
that's why the planning commission is authorized to do it. They don't have to, but they are authorized to do it.
Okay. How does the planning commission feel about that?
I like the way it is. I mean, we may not want to do it every time on a small project.
I take your point. Okay, yep, okay. Line 169. When permitted, emergency temporary dwellings may be permitted. That seems a little redundant to me, so. Can we just start with emergency temporary dwellings may be permitted upon a finding by the city that blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, you got it.
All right. I'm not gonna float my next shall require. 270.
You got one word there.
Completion.
270.
What the heck's wrong with that?
I don't know. Oh, I'm asking, should there be a time limit for completion? Yeah, this could go on for obviously indefinitely.
Not if it's going meaningfully.
Well, I think you have proceeds meaningfully until completion. So, at that point, it would probably be a conversation between myself, the zoning administrator, and someone at the building department of, is there still progress, meaningful progress going on that?
Okay.
So I think that's fine. I think the scale of projects is gonna vary so greatly between, somebody doing a front porch that might be done in a couple of weeks, somebody that's doing a large home that takes months and months and months.
Okay. If you're comfortable with that, I'm fine. You obviously, meaningful is in the eye of the beholder, right?
In this case, it's in the eye of the zoning administrator.
Okay. All right, it's up to you, Jeff. Line 365. I believe it should say section 520.5D, because there is no 521.5.
Okay, I'll check it out.
Yeah. Line 378, this one's really important. Administrator is misspelled. Let's see. Line 488. Oh, that's districts to be determined, never mind. And line 514, John,
is,
Yeah.
It's. Um. It shouldn't be, other buildings in which personals customarily congregate, it should be persons customarily congregate.
Yeah.
That's it.
Thank you, Bob.
Thanks, Bob.
Sure. You and me both.
So Michael,
I just have a couple, I promise to keep it till about 30 minutes. I know we talked about this before, we're not quite sure, where we stand, or what the role is, of an administrative review committee, so just in looking at 180, that's kind of a placeholder. I know, but just that we make sure and come back to that. Or is it something that should come before the planning commission again? I don't know. In the same, yeah, okay, and then, 193, it seems that we had this situation, should there be a provision for, coming before planning commission, for an extension? I think we had that, might have, I vaguely recall something, where temporary dwelling unit because of an emergency was put up and they needed more than a year. So what happens? Do they just go back to the zoning administrator, or? So I don't know if we want to put in a provision for applying for an extension, or just assume that they'll come to the zoning administrator, or if there's an ARC that granted them that in the first place.
I would say, I'm looking at it, I would say after approval, let's put a comma and say unless extended, and then I think we'd have to insert who you want the extension approved by who, the zoning administrator or the planning commission?
Or the ARC. So, if there is one.
Actually, John.
Yeah.
Do we have language, so, like with the planning commission, when they do an approval, whether it's site plan or special land use. We have language in here that states that, you know, any approval granted by the planning commission, the applicant can come back for a 1-year extension.
Yeah.
I don't know if we have that language for, somewhere for the zoning administrator. But would it be appropriate to somewhere in the code have language for, you know, decisions made by the administrative review committee? Applicants may ask for a 1-year extension. You know, and just have that somewhere so that it could apply to any potential situation, as opposed to putting something specifically in this one spot.
We could probably take a look at putting it into the zoning administration article that has the role, you know, the roles and responsibilities, I think.
Yeah.
Take a look at, I could take a look at maybe having in one of the chapters, having it so it applies on a variety of issues, the ability to extend.
Right. Or we could state, if you guys would prefer, that that an extension for an administrative review committee approval would need to go to the planning commission if they wanted an extension. The choice is up to you, but I think we could do that instead of doing it individually per.
That sounds elegant.
That's fine with me. I just thought there should be a provision for extending beyond the initial year if necessary.
Yeah.
Stated.
Okay, John, would you care then to see if you can come up with something that will apply globally?
Yeah, I will. Yep, I got a note.
Great.
And then one very small item, and it's just for 372, line 372 and 382, this deals with damage that was done to a non-conforming-ish structure due to windstorm, snowstorm, rainstorm, flood, or other casualty damage. I get other casualty damages there, but I feel that we need to pay homage to the ice storm. So I would like to see the word ice storm listing all these other storms. Let's list one that actually happened. And hopefully,
Where are we at again, Michael?
372 and 382.
Okay.
Yeah, this is in repair and maintenance of non-conforming structures. Maybe, I know language that they use that's sort of for similar circumstances that I have in assessing practice by the state. They say like, you know, firestorm or other act of God.
Yeah.
So and it's to differentiate between something that just happens to the property by an outside source as opposed to something that the property owner has done themselves.
Yeah, we're listing all these other things.
Yeah.
And how does that happen?
Yeah, I say let's put ice storm in there, so that always.
Wait, we can put it in.
I say it sort of in jest, so I'm sorry.
No, that's fine.
I like it.
Let's be comprehensive.
Not in jest, we're still dealing with that.
No one will refer to it for another 100 years. That's okay.
No, 10 years from now, when we'll be looking at this, we will say, why is ice storm in there?
Oh, we'll remember that. All right. Other suggestions?
189, no, we just went from there. I don't know if it's meant to be like this, but every like word, there's double spaced in between it, besides.
I think it's right, Justin.
Yeah, I think it's the justification is
Okay.
oddly spaced that, yeah.
Got the John line 189 is,
The justification.
there's no justification for that.
Chair,
Yes.
I know I already had my say, but I just found something while we were sitting here. Line 213, section 5, 118, livestock and wild game. Wild game shall not be maintained in any zoning district. Community is a zoning district. We do have a deer park.
Whoa. That is deep right there.
Sorry.
Have fun with the character.
What do we do?
Go shoot the deer.
Say they're not
I
allowed.
guess we say except in community. Except in the community district, and we don't even know if that's what it's gonna be called yet. But any other thoughts on how to solve that?
That's two solutions. I think both have been suggested.
I don't think that's as big of an issue as we think. You know, the city is not necessarily bound by their own zoning code. The city council can make decisions that go beyond it, and we even had, I think it went to a ballot proposal. So I think that issue has already been addressed.
Okay, fine.
I wasn't gonna bring it up, but I will say. In the future, when we talk about the ag overlay and all that stuff, I think there was some mention of bees, beekeeping and chickens. I just want to make sure that that happens independently of the language of this 518. I think it will, but just want to make sure that we have the freedom to do what we want on that other stuff.
Looks like it.
Since they're not mentioned.
Uses are usually.
So let's remember that.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. Well, it sounds like we're ready to wrap Article 5. Any last thoughts on that? All right, it brings us to a crossroads and decision point. We've been dying to get into zoning districts. We had it almost gotten into it in the last 2 or even 3 meetings. And yet here it is about 7:30. It's a really important discussion. One of the most important ones we'll have. What do you think? Should we throw out some concepts now, or should we just wrap up this meeting and come back in 2 weeks and start fresh?
Bill, I can't, yeah, I'm sorry, I can't see us getting started on this and then stopping. You know, it's 8:30, let's stop. I mean, this is something I think, once it starts flowing, I think you gotta see it through to the end. That's one man's opinion.
I would agree with Bob. I've been through this in a number of communities. You really wanna have this as your primary topic for an entire meeting.
So, rest of the planning commissioners, could you give me a little bit of your opinion on that, so I make sure we're in consensus?
Kick the can down the road.
In the most professional, helpful sort of way.
Right. One thing I wondered about a little bit, maybe as a preamble to the discussion, does it make sense to sort of look at what zoning districts are supposed to do as far as adjacencies and things like that, that maybe John could talk about a little bit? I know may not be prepared, John, but just to understand a big overview of what this is we're talking about, because there's a lot of reasons why we ended up where we did, and we're revisiting those. But in my mind, I go back and look at, what was the intent? What are we following? What was the thing that sort of ignited certain ideas? And I just wonder if there's a discussion to be had now that would give us all something to think about before the next meeting, or we should just do it all in one sitting. Just an idea.
Mark Ronda.
I'll give you another little suggestion as a preamble that flows from a discussion that Jeff and I had this morning. Article 2 deals with uses, is that correct?
No, Article 2 is the zoning district boundaries.
Article 3 is uses.
4 are the uses.
Oh, okay.
And the approvals.
So, okay, well, anyway, the discussion briefly that I had with him this morning was regarding one of the books that John Echoangeli loaned me. And in that book, the author presents sort of a different paradigm for looking at uses. And that paradigm is the zoning codes across the country are filled with use tables, pages and pages and pages, sometimes thousands of different uses that they've thought up that they might approve. And his contention is that it's better to look, it's not so much the use that necessarily that's objectionable, but it's the nuisances that use creates. And he suggests looking at creating nuisance tables as opposed to use tables, and in defining particular nuisances, noise or smells or odors or whatever, and addressing those as opposed to addressing particular uses. And if that's Article 3, then it's down the road. So, but I would suggest again this book that Echoangeli referred me to, that has some really
Karen.
One of the items that the community brings for questioning is the idea of the districts. And 2 meetings ago, you had said that you would consider doing a districts learning session. So maybe between you and with John, we could have that so that as we start talking about all the districts, we're being able to look at the whole picture of the districts. As many as are out there, and in addition to the nuisance,
nuisances.
nuisance. However, that,
Can you tell me more about what would be in a learning session?
no, it was your idea. Well, I saw it in the transcript, so learning session about districts, talking about the district, what districts we have from the old days, what districts they wanted to change to the repealed code, how it would benefit the differences of the way people want to live in a district, the way that they can live in a district, things like that.
Okay. John, John Angela, do you recall anything like that?
In terms of discussions in Harbor Springs,
Or, yeah,
I think at one of our several public meetings over a year ago, there was the discussion of how we got to the consolidated.
Yeah.
How we consolidated the districts, and there was discussion about that, and I think I could go back through the materials, but I think we could probably do a 10 or a 15-minute quick presentation on the concept of districts and why communities have districts and what the history is along, about the evolution of zoning districts in communities. I think communities miss the point. Everybody's used to all these various zoning districts. A few people understand how we got to all of the number of districts that we have. So I think once you figure out, or at least understand why we got to the number of districts, it's awful hard to go back and try to unravel that. Because it's all based on, goes way back to the 1920s in some of the original Supreme Court cases based on Euclidean zoning, that communities had to have different districts basically to protect themselves from different uses. Okay, we didn't want to build a single family subdivision next to a foundry. Okay, we didn't want to build houses next to hog and slaughterhouses. And so the idea came up of having separate districts to push different uses into different areas of the community. And over a period of decades, if not centuries, since we started this, it's gotten more refined, more exact, more detailed, more cumbersome. So you really have to understand the evolution of zoning districts in terms of understanding why communities now are trying to consolidate them. I think where Mark was going with some of the new ideas out there is communities are trying to get away technically from the number of zoning districts, and they're looking at the concept of what makes a community functional. And then based on that, then you create the code in order to enhance your vision for the community. You don't let the districts determine how the community is going to evolve. The community determines how it's going to evolve, and then you apply the appropriate regulations and code to it.
all right. Well, planning commission members, do you think that'd be a worthwhile kickoff to the next meeting and discussion about that?
Yes. I think it's consistent with what Mark said. We just kind of set the table for us all to understand it better, kind of the history. And about what Jeff said, the why part of it.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah, could I make a comment?
Yeah.
I agree, and I think we should do two as a whole, as you mentioned, Bob. I think we should not do it tonight, And also, in my preparation for tonight, I read through section 4, which is the overlay sections, overlay areas. And I'd ask that we not pursue the details of that section necessarily. We stay focused on 2, but I'd ask that everyone read that because it does inform you a little bit more about how did the zoning commission get to where they were because of floodplains and different, geo formations in town even. And so So use that as homework, I think, to help us all be more informed as we approach section 2.
Bill? One question, I wonder, I don't know the practicality of this, but it would really be helpful to know what John's gonna say before we start thinking about what our opinions are on the zoning districts. Is it possible we could do a 15-minute Zoom meeting? Or that it could be recorded and the public and the planning commission members could watch it at their leisure, so that as I'm thinking about how many zoning districts we should have and what their function should be, I'm thinking about it in the context of what John is saying, rather than just because John might say something that would totally change my opinion in terms of how the zoning district should be laid out, or what they should be, what their function is, and so on. So I mean, I'm just wondering if we could do like a 15-minute Zoom meeting that we could all watch, public could watch as well, in advance of getting together at the next planning commission meeting.
Okay, there's some legalities to that. Jeff? Do you want to tell us what the limitations are?
I think it might be difficult to organize. We have to look at making sure that we provide proper notification to the public so that they could participate, right? The other thing is just setting some type of a date to find out where everybody could be available to be able to have something like that.
I wasn't contemplating live. I was contemplating something that would be recorded that everybody could look at.
Oh, yeah. Like that John or I could record for you, and then like just run a video and then send you a link.
Yeah.
I can talk to John and see if we can do something like that. We might be able to. It's also the timing of,
I know
John and or I will have to prepare this, and how soon in advance of the meeting could we have
I understand
something prepared for you. We'll look and see what we can do. If there's a video or something that might provide some insight as to this, we'll try and do that. Or possibly we could put together some short PowerPoint presentation and give you more opportunity than what we throw it in the packet to give. We'll do our best to see what we can do. But I have no guarantees.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I'm not trying to make work for you guys. I would hate to listen to John's words of wisdom, or your words of wisdom coming on the 15th. Is it the 15th we're getting together? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then have it suddenly, gee, I never thought of that. My entire opinion has changed. That's my concern.
Let me find something for the group. I think Jeff and I can talk about it. There may be some videos out there that are already prepared that can maybe are general enough to give you kind of a background on how to start thinking about this.
That would be great.
Okay, yes, thanks.
Leo, little I cordially, Leo, one other.
What was that? I'm sorry.
No, it was just it was nothing.
Okay.
Something.
One thing I would like to discuss maybe is, do we have any special use permits or anything on the agenda for the next meeting at this point?
No, we do not have any applications, so there won't be anything else on the agenda other than these topics.
Maybe we flip the agenda around a little bit where we discuss Article 2. And then if there's time left after that, then we can go back and look at the red lines. And just so we can maximize the amount of time that we have for 2, because that could take 3 hours. And so maybe I'd rather push out the red lines to the next meeting if necessary, and just really have a dedicated period.
That sound good? All right, great. You got it. Karen.
So the districts is, I would say probably more than almost anything. It's going to be important to the community, people that aren't even here in town yet. And perhaps this program could be the invitation to all of the residents so that they know that this subject is about to happen. And so we would give them, the time to it would be done with time, to notify. Within the parameters of notification of, all of the property owners. And, so that if they are interested in attending and participating in, these discussions, they would know that this is the time that it happens.
How would that differ from the regular process?
No, just that there's something on Zoom that goes out and then it's sent out through the email lists and things like that, and they go, oh, you know, here's something from the city that is a learning session about the districts. This does affect my property, Third Street. So it's now time to pay, you know, pay as much attention as we can.
Although I'm envisioning that if John and Jeff are gonna find some existing academic or scholarly video about the theory of zoning districts, then I'm not sure people would love to receive that. And then
Well,
directed to, you know, some hour-long
I think
geeky
what
thing.
might be best is, we can certainly email that, like, if it's a video, a link, or whatever we send to the planning commission members ahead of time to prepare you for the meeting. We'll make sure to, whether it's in the agenda or whatever material for the meeting on May 15th, provide that information to, as part of the packet to everybody, that everybody has access to that same information that you guys have reviewed.
Great. Tiff,
Yeah, I feel like the presentation about districts would be like the one we had on by rights and on density. Remember, we called them, and we opened a meeting with that. So it's just carrying that along those lines. We did it with parking. We have a process.
agreed. I just don't remember what Karen thought I agreed to or promised. I can't reconstruct it.
End of the meeting that was before the Romaine meeting, and you brought up, well, our discussion on parking was so great, why don't we do this with districts before we get into the article? And then Jeff said, oops, we've got a special land use, it's gonna take up a lot of time. And then you said maybe we could put it on the agenda, but it never got on the agenda because the Romaines were huge. You know, sucker.
Okay,
So that's,
I get the concept. I haven't had
it was
anything.
at the end of your meeting, it was a really long. Anyway, but that's where it came from.
Okay, so I said it, so
Go back.
now I gotta do it. All right, so I'll work with John and Jeff and see if there's something we can put together that.
It just might be a
That's
little
all.
easier than doing the video about zoning from the University of wherever. I think you're right, that's gonna be a little technical, but if we could just do something where John explains it with Jeff. Maybe 30 minutes, half hour.
Yeah, just write a script, whip up and record it and.
We'll either find something or put something together for you as best we can.
All right.
Bill, I'd also like to point out, we've got Margaret's iPad online that's had their hand up for a little while.
Oh, Margaret's iPad.
Margaret, if you're still there, if you would like to chime in.
She's on mute.
Okay, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
We can, yes.
Okay, sorry about that. I've had my hand up for a while, and in fact, there are certain sections that you guys were going through that the audience that were there present could speak, but anybody that was on Zoom could not. So I just wanted to, going forward, if there's any way you guys can keep on checking, if anybody has their hand up, that'd be great. Chip, you had mentioned something about the ag section with bees and chickens. And can you clarify what you were referencing?
What, Chip?
Oh, yeah, this is Kenny. I mentioned that.
Okay, sorry.
There was a provision in the repealed code that allowed the ag overlay area to have up to 6 chickens, no roosters, and beekeeping in the ag overlay area. We haven't decided what we want to do. That was simply last year when in the repealed code. My point was that topic may come up again, and I want to make sure that whatever we decide then in the future about that topic, the language about all the livestock and so forth doesn't conflict with that. That's
Okay.
it.
The one thing on bees, I just want to let everybody know that we are, there was a major hit in northern Michigan with regards to bees, like 80% destruction. And I know there's a lot of people in town that actually do have beehives. And so I would not want to deter on trying to increase the bee population because it will impact this area greatly. And Harbor Springs, due to the trees and so forth, does well with bees. And so I would just make sure that we try to encourage this instead of limit this in any way. And it's really a tragedy that's what's taking place right now. So I just want to make sure that we are being aware of the environment around us.
Great, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, any other comments from?
I have one quick comment, you know, as part of the, maybe the instruction package, I assume we're gonna get a video or some materials, pros of why we need this number of districts that were proposed. Can we get some information about the cons? I mean, what are people, like, why are people against this? And kind of have more, the total information. You see what I'm saying? What have you heard? People don't want to change this. Why? And maybe they have valid arguments. I just don't know. I don't know how we do that.
Okay, I don't think we're gonna see that in a university or something.
I don't think we are either.
Yeah.
Definitely not out of John, so.
Yeah.
I'm envisioning that whatever we find or put together for you will be more about the purpose and the need for where you would say this needs to be a separate zoning district from this.
Okay.
And where you would have the need for more districts, and then John has mentioned the theory of modern times where we're reducing the number of districts, and maybe more on the holistic idea of what the purpose of a zoning district is, to have different rules from each other or whatnot. And then after we have that, we can then go to the specifics of Harbor Springs in looking at our existing zoning district map, the proposed zoning district map, the future land use map, and see how that all ties together and where we see for Harbor Springs the need for different districts based on that discussion. Does that sound like that would work for you?
Great. All right. Planning Commission, any last comments? All right. Audience, nobody. Audrey.
Are you going to be including section 4 in the packet so that we can, like Kenny suggested, we read that before? I mean, you're not gonna discuss it at the meeting,
Yeah.
but how do I get access to section 4?
It's on
It is on the website.
Yes, on the Planning Commission. It's in the Planning Commission section, by current code and repeal.
Okay, I
So I
just
can-
always assume when we're discussing.
I
I mean, I take it.
I'll show you how to.
I'll look, all right, thank you.
You bet. All right. Then our next meeting is 2 weeks from tonight. That's May 15th, 5:30, same place. And we'll get ready to do some homework before that. All right, meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Save that line. Save that.